It says then in verse 4, therefore those who were scattered went everywhere preaching the word. Now we say, why would God allow this persecution? Why would God allow Christians to suffer? Why would he allow them to die? We know he told them beforehand that it was going to happen, but why would he allow it? Because God has a purpose in their death. God has a purpose in their suffering. God has a purpose in the difficulty that they are going through. So God used them, their struggle, their persecution, to take the gospel around the world. If there was no persecution, they would have just stayed in Jerusalem. They were there, they were growing, people were becoming Christians, they would have stayed there. But as soon as persecution arose, the pressure of persecution caused them to flee to other cities. And they brought the message of the gospel with them to the other cities that they went to. Now, to be sure, Satan is behind this. It's Satan who's stirring up the hearts of men to kill Christians. It's Satan who is doing that around the world today. We talked about the increased violence against Christians around the world today. And Satan is stirring up their heart to do it. Satan means the difficulty, the sufferings, the deaths. I think of I can't remember how many men there were in Libya. There were Christians who were brought out, knelt down in the orange jumpsuits and beheaded. Satan meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. In the book of Genesis, near the end, Joseph is the favored son. Jacob ends up marrying 4 different wives. He loves Rachel, and his father-in-law snuck in the older, ugly sister without him knowing, behind a veil. And after the marriage night, he woke up, and it was Leah, not Rachel, that he had worked for to pay the dowry, and he loved. And so he worked another 7 years for Laban and was given Rachel immediately. And so all of a sudden there were 2 wives, and these were sisters that would have a rivalry that would go on. And one of them would want to have more children than the other. In fact, Leah started having kids, but Rachel didn't have any. And so Rachel gave her handmaiden to Jacob. Now he's got 3 wives. And then Leah, when she stops having kids, she gives her handmaiden to him. And so he's got 4 wives. And people say, why would God allow that? Hey, he has got problems. You study the life of Jacob, and there are many problems that he has. Every person in the Bible where there was polygamy had difficulties and problems, and Jacob is one of them. When I study the life of Jacob, I find myself sad for him by the end of it, because there's so many things that happen. But one of them is that he's got 12 sons, and his wife Rachel finally has a son. His name is Joseph. And so he favors Joseph because he's the son of his favorite wife of all things. And so his 10 brothers sell him into slavery. Now he also has another son by Rachel named Benjamin. When Rachel had him, she died. This is the wife that he wanted to marry in the beginning. She died when she had Benjamin, and she named him Ben-Oni, which is son of my sorrow. And when Jacob came in and saw him, he said, you will not be Ben-Oni, you will be Benjamin, son of my joy. He wouldn't let him be son of his sorrow, but you will be son of my joy. And they were jealous of Joseph because he was obviously going to he had given Joseph a coat of many colors, which is authority, and they sold him into slavery. They were going to kill him first. And then Judah said, what value is there if we kill him? Let's sell him. Here's the Ishmaelites, let's sell him. And so they sold him into slavery. He was brought to Egypt, and he was made a slave. Taken from being the favored son to a slave in Egypt, where he becomes a servant for the commander of the army of of Egypt. And his wife wants to seduce him. So she grabs a hold of him and she says, sleep with me. And he won't do it. He won't go into the house when she's there. And finally he goes into the house, she grabs a hold of him, and he wiggles out of his coat. That's the second coat he lost. The brothers took the first one, then he took that one. And when she comes home, she says, you've brought this Hebrew in here to violate me. Look, I have his coat. And so Potiphar threw him into prison, where they put him in fetters, shackles, and they crippled his feet. The Bible says his feet were crippled. He never walked the same again after that. But he could interpret dreams, a gift from God. And eventually that gift of interpretation, freed him from prison, and made him the second most powerful man in all of Egypt. When his brothers, suddenly in a famine without food, came and stood before him, not knowing him. And he was harsh with them at first, but then finally revealed himself to them, was restored to his father, and forgave them for what they did. And after their father died, their brothers came to him and said, "We were remembering our faults when we sold you to the Ishmaelites." And here's the response that Joseph gave to his brothers. This is Genesis 50:20. "But as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring it about as it is this day, to save many people alive." God had a bigger plan. What Satan means for evil, God means for good. What Satan wants to do in your life that could be to tear you down, to destroy you, God will allow it for good, because that's what God does.